There we go. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. All right, I'm Angela Chandler. I am the presenter for today. I know some of you all know me and have seen my presentations before, but for those of you who are new, I will do my introduction. I currently work for the MITRE Corporation. I am a government contractor. A lot of my projects, because I'm a consultant, focus around healthcare. I also have a very special place for DEIA initiatives. Just to give you all a little bit of background, the project that I'm currently working on is specifically for our VA, also known as the Veterans Affairs. They are in the process of standing up basically a governing body that supports all of the decisions that will be made for in diversity, inclusion, equity, and access, really focusing on equity right now. I've also participated in other healthcare projects that focus on DEI&A. NIH had a project called All of Us, and the purpose of that was to work with different healthcare facilities across the United States to pull data from people who are typically underserved in the healthcare industry and understand that data so that way we can have a database that is more reflective of the US population and use that moving forward in health analysis and setting up systems and so on and so forth. So I won't go through all the projects, but that is one. Those are a couple of the work that I have done. Another thing I did at my current company was to set up what we call an ERG. It is called an employee resource group. A lot of larger companies tend to have these. And it is a multicultural ERG, so multicultural employee resource group. It was the first of its kind at the organization, and the organization has about 12,000 people across, I would say, about 4 or 5 different locations in the United States. Those are our main hubs, one being here in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C., another hub which is just outside of Boston, and then we have hubs in San Francisco, Hawaii, Florida, and Colorado. So bringing that program to all the hubs as well as the headquarters was pretty big lift. So that gives you all an idea of my professional experience in DE&I. And then as a personal experience, I grew up biracial in a time where it was not as popular. So, you know, growing up with 2 very different but amazingly similar sides of a family was always interesting because race was always a topic. Race culture was always a topic growing up. So I have a lot of personal and professional experience in talking about these subjects, which has driven me to learn about them. So that's a little bit about me. So jumping into today's presentation, I'm presenting 4 presentations. I've done others that fall under this, but I really wanted to cover the basics. I think it's really important for us to understand the basics of what these terms mean and how they apply to the United States in particular, because that's where all of us live. So I already did part 1, which is diversity. I will do a recap of that because it does influence inclusion, but today's focus is on inclusion. And then the future presentations will focus on equity and access. All right, so let's jump in. All right, so ground rules. I always like to do ground rules. So this is a learning opportunity. There are no dumb questions. If you are uncomfortable asking a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Privately message me. I will keep your name anonymous and I will answer and discuss the question on behalf of you if that's how you feel comfortable. I do want to create a psychologically safe space. So I don't want anyone to feel ousted for what they have to say. I know we all come from different backgrounds. I'll talk a little bit about that as I do the diversity recap. So, you know, some of the things you may have learned along the way may be incorrect or, may be correct. Let's talk about it, right? Here is the place to talk about it. I will promise you all, you probably won't say much that I haven't already heard during the course of my life. So I say that very openly in my experiences. So please, if you have questions, bring them to the table. Actively listen. I want to really push this. Again, on my presentations comes with facts and stats. That's where I prefer to speak in. I don't like to speak in uneducated opinions. That's kind of what I call them. Everyone has opinions. I understand that. But, if you're going to share your opinion, please be able to back it in some type of root of data analysis, some type of fact, right? But I say that also to the contribution of the conversation. Again, there's no dumb questions. So if you heard something along the way and you would love to talk about it, happy to do so. But please actively listen. Don't listen to respond. There's a difference. Please stay on topic. Today, we are really focusing on inclusion. I know there's a lot of things in this to talk about, but today's focus is inclusion. So if you want to talk about something else, I will ask you to put a pin in it and we can bring it up at another time. Also be curious and be humble as well. All right. All right, so let's start off, let's get into the meat of it. So today, again, we're talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, and access. So here are the definitions for each one of those. It's kind of a compilation of research. I pulled them from different sources. They really do overlap as far as their definitions. But as you can see here, diversity is all the ways in which people differ. Inclusion is the act of creating environments. And this is what we'll be talking about. Today is talking about environments or systems. I work in health systems engineering. So I look at things as systems. And when we start to look at things from the bigger picture, it makes it easier to consume on the lower levels. So I will be talking a lot in systems today. And again, if you have questions or don't understand, feel free to chime in as we go along. You don't have to save it till the end. Equity is all having the opportunity to fully participate, and access refers to the commitment for everyone to be included. So I have this image here of how it all works together, right? So we have a diverse set of people, which you can see here at the bottom. Again, I'll go through this again as a recap of what makes this all different, right? That is diversity. And then you can see at the top here, we have kind of the roof of the house, which is the inclusive climate, inclusive systems, going back to that, right? That topic, that overall inclusivity. And then you have your windows here, your equitable practices and inclusive programs. Again, going back to systems, programs is on a higher level. And then getting in the door is access. So, again, our legislation system, I've given a talk on that as well. The policies and the compliance and the laws is all part of our system. And that provides the foundation for inclusive climate. So this is kind of how everything works together in one big unit. That's why, I think it's really important to understand one, the differences between the four, and then how they exist in our lives. All right. So I'm going to do a quick recap on diversity. This was the last presentation I gave, but it really influences how inclusion is handled, and it'll really help set the stage for our reflection and our conversation on inclusion. So I will do a quick recap. So again, diversity refers to all the ways in which people differ, right? So we have these lists of primary and secondary characteristics, and I'll go through those again on the next slide just briefly. But again, we have the primary characteristics, I'll just go ahead and jump ahead. So we have our primary characteristics, right? And those are the most visible. So those are gender, race, sexual orientation, and age, right? Those are the things that you may or may not see, depending on, when you first meet or greet a person, whether it's, virtually in this environment, or, visually out in the world or out in the wild, as I like to say. The visibility leads to a lot of assumptions. Right? We have these predisposed assumptions about someone based on their age, based on their perceived race, right? Again, speaking to someone who's biracial, and I know others have talked about this in other places in these conversations, is, it's perceived race, right? People don't always know my race. They don't know. They assume I'm Latina or Indian, depending on how I wear my hair or my makeup. It can change. And I know for a lot of us, that is true too. Even people who identify as Caucasian, if you dye your hair a certain color, or, put makeup on, you can, your ethnicity, your race can change, even with lighter skin, same thing with darker skin. So, that, again, it's perceived. So those biases may be true, maybe not. And I gave a presentation on bias as well. So feel free to look through the archives as well, because that's a big one. Secondary characteristics, these are the non-visibility things. So again, family status, education, income, you don't always know that upon greeting a person. These are really the things that have been shaped by where you live, how you grew up, culture, parents, influences, things like that. Choices, those are all, secondary characteristics are really defined by your life's experience. And those all come together in what we call intersectionality, right? So again, all of those components come together to create us and make us individuals who we are. And all of us are different, right? We may grow up doing the same things in the same communities, but we have different parents, different cultural backgrounds, right? And that's going to change our experiences based on what our parents told us, who our friends group were growing up, right? And how you were perceived within that friends group, whether it was based on race or societal economic status. All of those change who we are as we grow up and go into this wonderful thing called the world. All right. So now that we've done the recap, let's jump into inclusion. Because again, diversity influences inclusion. So now that we have all these diverse people, right, and all of our diversities that make us who we are, how do we create systems that are inclusive? And I will be honest, in researching this and in talking about this topic, I won't say I agree with the systems that are in place, and I'm not saying that, but it is very difficult to be inclusive of everyone. So thinking about all those diverse components, it can be very difficult. So we have to give a little bit of grace and respect to these systems that are now changing to accommodate us and our differences, right? Before they wanted to make things standardized and cookie cutter and things like that. And as we know, it's not working for everyone. So how do we make these systems work for us? So I want to go through some points to consider today. This is really about, I created this presentation instead of just going, I'll present some stats, but I really want people to think about the systems in which we live. So I'm going to cover a couple different systems today. So one being healthcare, right? That's one thing that we all utilize. If you haven't been to the doctor, I'm not going to have that spiel today, but all of us utilize the healthcare system, or you should be. So what is, so points to consider in there, the employment system, right? I'm pretty sure all of us are employed or have been at some point or another. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And so also, so we're going to talk about the systems and the education system as well. And then we'll get into some conversation. So, all right. So again, starting off with kind of chat. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not missing any chats. Inclusion. So again, they're linked. So inclusion refers to how diversity is leveraged, right, to create fair, equitable, healthy, and high-performing organizations or communities, right? So these are kind of the areas that we need to be inclusive, right? It's either an organization, so I'll talk about that a little bit today, again, in the workplace, or just our communities, right, and where we live. Also, the benefit to inclusion, right, is when people feel included, they are better able to contribute to the group. We talk a lot about this at my job, and, without fear of being ostracized. As a consulting organization, it is really important to have diversity of thought. Especially depending on the project that you're working on, because we are serving the U.S. population and, everyone. I work for government agencies that are like the IRS, right? We deal with them every year. It just went by tax time, right? So, we will all be impacted by, these government systems. So, and it, it needs to reflect the U.S. population. This is one of the things we talk about. So having diversity of thought is really, really important. All right, so let's start off with some of the research. So I'm doing this to kind of level set. So let's look at we'll start by looking at the US population. I'm going to focus on the United States for this presentation. So that's where most of the focus in the US systems. I know other systems are different. We can talk about that later, but let's just really focus on the United States health system. The United States system. So the population, We're going to start off talking about race, and this is cited by the census. So this is one of their projection graphs that they put out in 2016. So you can kind of see they tracked based on the census. Just for everyone's clarity, I'm going to try and explain these concepts in detail to be inclusive. So the U.S. Census Bureau is a government organization. They send out postcards, I think, every 10 years to collect information on the United States and its demographics. They do a lot of other things with that information, but I do encourage you to, if you get one of those, to participate. They do not comply with other organizations. That's not how it works. The federal government just doesn't talk to each other. So their really concern is really monitoring the United States and its population. And everything about it, who the people are from a demographic perspective, how long they're living, how long they're not living. It really provides a basis for data, and the Census Bureau really informs a lot of the legislation, or it's supposed to, a lot of the legislation that happens at the federal level. So it is an important organization. They do collect this information. So as you can see, they are tracking since 2010 the changes. So this is what's called, this is the type of bar graph. So just to kind of go through on how to read this. So you can see, obviously, it's color coordinated. Do I have anyone here, again, being inclusive? Do I have anybody here who's colorblind and cannot read the different colors? I will be happy to explain that. This is something, again, that I have to do in my presentations for work. So I just want to make sure if anybody is, feel free to raise your hand or send me a ping, and I will be happy to do that. So as you can see here, we have at the bottom, we have white or non-Hispanic, and these are percentages. So these numbers right here are your percentages of the population. The second one is Hispanic, and you can see that here in this dark purpley blue, and the number of percentage it correlates. And then so everything leads to 100%. So we're talking about 100% of the population. And then these, it's broken down into 4 sectors by color, which kind of covers at a high level the different races that we see within the United States: Black, Asian, Hispanic, and white. And so you can see this is one of their projections. And you can see where it's trending into a more diverse United States. So we are right here in the middle of 2020 and 2025. And as you can see over, now there's different projections and it changes, but they are estimating somewhere in between 2040 and 2050, depending on the source and the time, and that, basically the United States the white population will not be the dominant population anymore. Now, exactly when that happens, we're not sure, but if you look at all the projections, it'll be post 2040. So yeah, that's coming up kind of quick. So this is one consideration, right, that when we're thinking about diverse systems that we need to think about. The US population, it is changing, right? And this includes mixed race. And the reason mixed races include in Black and Asians, because those are the racial groups that are mixing more. Hispanic is not mixing as much. All right, so continuing that, so thinking also about age. So age is another factor, right? So I just kind of wanted to put this in here. This is a little bit more detailed. And again, it's the same type of graph. So you can see here 0 to 18. And this is as of 2021, just for reference. I'm pretty sure it's at the top. So this is kind of where the US population sits now. So in addition to race, we also need to think about race. I hate to, we have to think about these kind of compounding factors that impact our inclusive environments. So you have race, which is important, but you also have age. And as we know, yes, you may be of a certain culture, but if you're first generation, second generation, or of a different generation, that also impacts inclusivity as well, because as we know, not all generations are created equal or the same. They just have different aspects to them. All right, so let's jump into some more stats. So again, we'll start up with the healthcare system. So I'll start off by talking about social determinants of health. This is, some of the work that I've tried to focus on. And really this term, it focuses on the non-medical factors that influence health outcomes. So for example, where you're born, where you live, where you work, play, worship, all that impacts how we operate within the healthcare system and how we want to operate within the healthcare system, right? And that also changes. So, depending on all these factors, this can really lead to what we call negative health outcomes for certain groups, right? So for example, if you don't have transportation to get to a healthcare facility, obviously you're not going. That is, one of the big, determinants. If your bus route, if you depend on public transportation and your bus route, just doesn't take you by the hospital, now you have to pay for a taxi, and depending on where you live and how far those facilities are, that can provide a problem. That's an immediate barrier, right? I'll talk in terms of barriers right there for some. Obviously, there's others, racism, discrimination, declining treatment due to race or ethnicity. We have seen that. Discrimination, we've seen that as well. And then obviously education, job opportunities, income. If you're unable to communicate how you're feeling or what you're feeling, you can be dismissed by physicians. Access to nutritious foods. Obviously, if I'm not here to preach, but if you're not eating your fruits and vegetables and being physical, this really, really impacts your health. So again, all of these really go into the system of healthcare and can be affected. All right, so additional points to consider. So now let's bring in the healthcare system and race, right? So obviously it's Anti-Racist Jubilee. So I'll present some context and then go into how race is implemented across the spectrum. So I'll get into this in the next subject as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about people with disabilities next. But I did want to highlight some of these stats of how people across the spectrum of race are interacting with our healthcare system, right? So let's talk about mental illness. That is a big topic, and I will say especially Generation Y, Z, millennials especially, which is my, again, generation. So this is, I know, a big topic of conversation, at least in the circles that I'm in, is mental illness. So, you can kind of see the stats here. And these stats are pretty new. They're as of 2021, what's been reported. So as you can see, the stats around mental health services. And then again, life expectancy, right? So the second bullet really, I think, paints a pretty clear picture of life expectancy across different races, right? And this relates to healthcare. Black infants, we'll talk about mortality at birth. We're more than 2 times as likely to die than white infants, and there's some stats there. This also impacts our Asian communities as well. And then as you can see, Black and Hispanic children were over twice as likely to be food insecure, right? Which is another social determinant of health. So those are kind of the factors that influence and affect the healthcare system. And this is the need to be inclusive. These are all, things that impact, our inclusive health system. And it's hard, right? So when you're thinking about all of these, we're talking about different wings of a healthcare unit, right? And it's really hard to be inclusive. So I'm not, again, saying that we shouldn't, that we can do better, we can, but we have to consider all the factors as well. And it's a lot to consider. And what do you prioritize first, right? All right, so going into disabilities, so right, one of the things that also compounds when we think about social determinants of health, this can also lead to people having disabilities. There's not always a one-to-one tie, but as we know, people of certain race groups are further affected by disabilities, and that's just kind of a compounding factor that can make it even more difficult. But this is something to consider when we're talking about building inclusive environments, and this can go from the physical environment to the social environment, right? If you have someone who has mobility issues, they are, unfortunately in a wheelchair, there's a whole ADA accessible legislation out there that organizations and facilities have to follow to be able to accommodate people who, have mobility issues. So I do want to point out the stat that 1 in 4 in the US have some type of disability. So again, as we're looking, we have more than 4 people obviously in this group. So, looking at the stats, if it holds true, there's going to be a couple of us that, have in this conversation that have a disability. And that, is going to impact how you work in America's systems, right? And the need to feel included. So, right, one of the other big ones is cognition. We're facing that with mental health. There's a lot of diagnoses under there. And again, independent living, difficulty doing things alone. This is something all of us could face as we age. So, we are not exempt from these, regardless of where we fall on our age spectrum. You might be, 30 and healthy and thriving right now, but in a few years, you could run into some circumstances, no fault of your own. And now, you're living with a disability. I will share one of my personal experiences that happened, I think, since we last spoke, which was really kind of hard for me to digest. I played sports. I played sports since I was 7. I played adult rec league sports. To be honest, I played flag football. I loved it. I stopped due to my own injury, which was not life-threatening, fortunately. I just, had a knee injury and I decided not to go back. My quarterback, on the other hand, did not fare so well. He went out for a motorcycle ride about 8 months ago now. And on that motorcycle ride, he was like, I don't really remember what happened, but he got into an accident and he spent the subsequent 3 months in the hospital. He has now lost his left leg, and it had to be amputated just below the hip bone. So again, he is younger than me. I would say Sax is about maybe 35, 36. So again, he went from a very healthy, person, and just in a matter of seconds, his whole life changed, and now he's a person with disabilities. And another reason to, be excluded, and another, statistic. So I just, kind of want to share. I know, other people have stories, but that story definitely hit close to home. So again, things change, and we can go from a person with abilities to disabilities pretty quickly. So again, his independent living is, greatly affected, and that's not due to age. Hearing deafness, right? We have a whole school here in DC that focuses on the deaf community, and it's really nice to see the jobs around it that support, employment of those kids that work there. Vision, I see a lot of us wear glasses, including me. Over time, if you don't monitor your vision in your eyes, glasses are just one step in the process to becoming blind. Over time, if you live long enough, and that can go into that direction. So, again, thinking about that, not trying to, sound cynical, but that there's a fact that's tied to that. And then self-care again, right? So again, I push this, and again, this is also impacted by race as well when you bring in social detriments of health, right? This really pushes people with disabilities and makes it really a real complex issue when you're talking about inclusion. All right, so let's tie the two together when you're talking about the healthcare system and then people with disabilities, right? Because this is something that can impact us all. People with disabilities have twice the risk of developing depression, right? Going back to mental illness, asthma, diabetes, stroke, obesity, poor oral health. And those are all major factors, that lead to the next stage or the sunset of our lives. Health inequity arise with persons from disabilities, including stigma. So when we're talking about inclusion, it's really is easy to stigmatize those people, and that, decreases access to healthcare, longevity, and quality of life. And then going into the racial component, any mental illness, Black, Hispanic, and Asian adults were less likely than white adults to receive mental health services. All right, I'll give you all just a quick minute to read over those stats. All right, is there any questions before I jump into the next topic? I know I've been talking a lot. I'll give people opportunity to discuss at the end. All right. All right, so the other system that we are all a part of is the United States employment system, right? So again, there's a lot of equal opportunity legislations in place that try to support and help create equity. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next presentation. But I do want to talk about the types of diversity in the workplace. And of course, we'll delve in a little bit about on race as well. But again, other ways to stigmatize race and ethnicity, of course, is at the top, because that's one of those primary characteristics, something that you can easily see when you meet someone. Obviously, we all go in for interviews, whether it's virtually or in person, and that's something that's easily seen. Sometimes it's just done over the resume, right? If we have one of those, different names. And there's a whole study that shows that if you don't have one of those normal names, you're not called back as often and things like that. And that has been proven in studies from various organizations. Gender representation, color discrimination, right? So going outside of race, but actual, color, pay disparities, age disparities, disability diversity. I'll be quite honest, in my organization, I do get to see people who have different disabilities. We do support those with autism. We have a whole program around it. We are very ADA accessible. I do have people that, have different disabilities, physical disabilities at my job. So I do get to see that, but I haven't always. Transgenders, and then age division, right? So these are all, again, all of the ways that make us diverse. And the U.S. employment system, our employers have to consider all these factors when creating inclusive environments. And it can be hard. Where do you start, right? What do you prioritize first, and then what comes last? And that's very hard as well. All right, so going into race and ethnic diversity in the workforce, as you can see, here are the numbers, and this is as of 2021. So yeah, 70%, 78% is Caucasian or white, 13% is Black, and as you can see, it's pretty representational of again, going back to the level setting I did earlier of the U.S. population. It's represented, but as you can see, it shows in the workplace as well. So again, when in the workplace, if you don't have diversity of thought or mind, it can lead to other issues as well. All right, so the education system, I know I had a couple of teachers, I'm not sure that they're here today in the group who would love this. So this map is really for the US school system, but it is very also representative of the population as well, where we have diversity across the United States. And as you can see, the darker bluer is more diverse, and then, the less blue is not. So you can kind of see here across the United States where we have more diversity and where, where we don't. And as you can see, if you look at the maps over time, it's definitely changed. Right, but a school system is, I know it's a very, very hot topic, especially in Florida and different states, about what's, should things like the race theory, the race theory be, promoted and discussed in schools, or should it not? So I know that's a really, really big topic right now as well, that's being discussed in legislation. All right, so points to consider for the school system. Let's talk a little bit about race, going back to that, and the changes that are happening. I think this is big. So as we talked about the changes that are happening within the US population, this is going to impact our school system. So when you're thinking about diversity, not only in race, but other things, because you have, kids who are disabled. Now that we're addressing mental health, that is a big topic, right? And, there's a lot of kids on medication for things like ADHD and other disabilities, anxiety that they may have due to social detriments of health, or just, how they're growing up, or maybe they're just predisposed to those mental illnesses. But, that's a big topic as well. That, that's in the policy making and that's being discussed, is how do we handle diversity in the schools? Are we still singing, the Pledge of Allegiance, things like that, that may be exclusive to, that doesn't include certain people from certain cultures or beliefs. So again, it's a big topic within our school system. And as you can see, the demographic is changing, right? It's shifting away from being predominantly white, and we're seeing more, Latinos in the schools. And as you can see, the number of Hispanic students increased from 11 million to 14 million over time between 2009 and 2020. So that is a major shift in society that we're seeing because, Hispanics, they bring more than just, color, they bring culture, there's, a language element there as well. So it's a lot of, they have their own desires when it comes to healthcare, how they operate. So, it can really change the foundation and dynamic. So, and then as you can see, going back to race, number of Black students decreased. So, is that due to decline in population? What's going on in the community? There's a lot of, questions and things that can be delved into and discussed there. And I will also say, if you look at some of the earlier graphs, they are very, race centric. It's really nice to see, at least from my perspective, that they're, really starting to consider the 2 or more races, and that will take an effect on its own, the biracials, because it's not just, biracials from, Black and white, or, there's a lot more, race fusion, I'll call it, happening in marriages as we're moving forward. So, that will take on its own entity as well. All right, so I have spent a lot of time talking. I do want to open up the floor for discussion. I have this set up as discussion and self-reflection. So I would like to open up the floor for people to share. I've shared a couple experiences. I'm happy to start us off. Again, creating that area of psychological safety. But I really want us to, kind of look at, start off by saying, your name, your location. I know we kind of did that in the chat, but I think it'll really help, us get to know each other during the discussion. So your name, location in the US, if you want to share a little bit about where you've lived, in other places, that would be helpful too. But again, discussion, what societal progress have you seen that contributes to inclusion? I think it's really important to focus on the positive and where we're prioritizing this. And, you can talk about it high level across the United States. You can talk about where you see it happening in your communities. Maybe it's in your hospital, maybe it's in your school, maybe it's in a business that you recently visited, in your, organization or community, whichever you would like to share. I think it's really important to hear about that from different people's perspective to see, how things are changing, or, maybe they're not as much, or they're not progressing as fast. I think with the points to consider, we have to really, think about that as we change and we grow to be inclusive. It's not easy coming from where the United States came from in its history. And I've given a presentation on that as well. Thinking about the history of the United States, this is a very big change. And it's a difficult one as well. And then self-reflection, right? I'm not asking people to share this because this can be, it can definitely tug on some heartstrings. But when was the last time you felt left out or excluded? One of the things that we talk about when we're talking about diversity and inclusion is that those who are excluded, it's almost like society requires you to find a way to be included. And that is really difficult. When something is not, I'm thinking about going back to my friend Sachs, who, recently lost his leg as, a mid-30-year-old man. He's now, his situation totally changed. So again, if I was out on the football field, I'd welcome him with open arms. But again, he's not going to be the top quarterback, of our little adult league that he was. We're probably not winning Turkey Bowl, right? Unfortunately, that's just the nature of it. So again, it's almost like society wants people who do have different diverse characteristics to force themselves in. But as we know, going back to that initial slide, if that door is closed, we can't gain access, right? The door has to be open. So it's almost like, oh, you're talking out of both sides of your neck. So again, thinking about how society wants people to force themselves to include, but I can't gain access and the door gets shut in my face. How do we overcome that? Because I know a lot more stories about that happening than, and then people always creating inclusive environments, right? So that's I think the push and the pull of this topic. So happy to talk about that. That is, that is within the realm of inclusion. So I want us to think about that as we're sharing, whether it's self-reflection or discussion. And the other thing to consider is when you felt excluded, did the people know that they were doing it? Or are they so biased that they didn't even realize that it's happening? Oops, I am so sorry. I meant to scroll down on the chat and it totally took me out of presentation mode. Okay. Apologies. I hate how it goes back. All right, so I will go, oh my gosh, okay. Let me get into the chat. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
Yeah, I believe that Jay Blue has a response.
Sure.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're on to speak now.
Okay. I'm sharing this because I think it's a good way to understand how there are a lot of things that, as you said, aren't visible. And yet people form impressions and people are excluded. Specifically, my daughter was born with a very serious heart defect. And when she was in 5th grade, the teacher asked me if I would come in and help the kids learn about disabilities. And we talked a bit about, again, visible versus invisible, because there are a lot of things, especially with kids, that you can't see, like a heart defect or diabetes or things like that. But at the same time, one of the things that I learned was that one of the questions that the teacher asked the kids was, if you had a lifeboat and you could choose 4 people, who would you choose and who would you leave out? And one of the kids said he would leave out my daughter because she was going to die because of her heart defect anyway. And I'm not sure how often we think about the way our minds form impressions about people based on things that aren't necessarily visible and we don't even realize are happening. And it's hard for everybody to figure out how to get around that kind, how to include people that are not visibly excluded.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That was, definitely self-reflection. And that there's a lot, I feel like, that goes into what you said about, oh, I wouldn't invite, your daughter because she's gonna die. That's, that goes into a lot of value perceptions and biases and thoughts about how our brains are wired. And the kid was being honest. I mean, and then that's the thing, based on how they were raised and their value set, that's the way they see the outcome going. And it's going to take a lot to change that person as they go into adulthood to make them see things differently, right? So, I think that's a really, really, thank you so much for sharing that. That's a really good example of, of how our society can be really not inclusive, but, exclusive almost. Would anyone else like to share? Go ahead. Mhm.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, this is Balan Manod. I'm from West Georgia, United Indivisible. One experience that I have, something is happening right now in my church. My church used to be about 80 to 90% white, and it's like everybody feel comfortable and welcome. But in the last year or so, we have a lot of Asians, especially from Philippines and from Cambodia also, and also some Hispanic that decided to join us. We welcome them. At the same time, a lot of the white people in the church decided to leave the church. And they said it openly. They said the church changed. They don't like this change. They moved to different church, go to another church which is got more white people. It's something that's in the process, as a matter of fact, going right now. And
Wow.
that show how it's not that they don't know, they know exactly what to do. That some people may not know, they do something not know why they do it, but they know exactly why they do it.
Interesting. So it sounds like the organization or that church community is being inclusive, but the people aren't supporting it for personal reasons.
Yeah, some of them, not all of them, some of them
Right.
not supporting it. They decided to change to leave the church completely.
Yeah. That's hard. Yeah, and that's interesting. And that's happening, I think, in a lot of our organizations and a lot of our society communities as we see the shift again go. That's why it was so important for me to share the US population and the change that's happening, because that change isn't just happening where you are. That's going those changes of increase or decrease in race and culture and all those things, those are happening across the United States. And they're going to start, you're going to start seeing the change locally, regardless of where you are. There might be some states, maybe like North Dakota, that's, up there and protected and maybe not as populous as some of the other states. So they might not see the change as much due to the populace of the state. But, everywhere else we are seeing that. And unfortunately, the reactions as well.
Yeah, I think that's a symptom of what's happening in United States altogether. On this case, you do not react violently, but maybe in different organizations, different people might react differently. They might feel that the minorities are pushing them away and taking over their organization, taking over their lives, and they might react differently. And that may be why you see so much violence around.
Yeah, definitely. And that's, I'm sure, hard on the leadership is how do they still create an inclusive environment for the people who may want to leave? Now they're feeling excluded, right?
Yes.
So how do you balance that? And that's why I say that this is hard, I'm not saying that what was created was right to begin with, but just that change, that shift, it's difficult. And who do you prioritize, right? Again, who do you prioritize?
Well, I think they try to preach union as much as possible. All the leaders try every Sunday talking about how God created us together. We should try to live together, but maybe it works for some, but not for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have thoughts?
I think Pam had a comment on the disability part.
Yeah. Yep, sure. Go ahead, Melissa.
All righty. I think, well, first I have to admit, I was a little bit taken aback with just the question in the beginning of what progress have you seen in our society right now, because much of the time I feel like we have taken so many steps back. And, I wonder, I just wonder how we will all survive. But I think the progress that has happened, and I don't know if it's in all of society, that there seems to be a movement or a desire for people to stand up and say something like, this isn't right. And I don't know that it's working yet. I don't think it's really working yet, or it's not effective, or there's not enough of us or whatever. But for me, I feel like the key is just being vulnerable and unlearning all of the things that were just straight out wrong. And I feel, or maybe it's the people that I'm hoping to attract into my life that also feel that way. So I guess that's what I'm at least hopeful for, and seeing change. And at least, I was working at a university, and them taking active steps of being inclusive and teaching people what that means, not just giving it lip service. So I'm hopeful that will continue.
I'd like to respond to that part. What societal progress have you seen contributes to inclusion? And you've heard me say this before, but I would have to go all the way back to the civil rights era, because that's my roots, And so I understand the disparities. I understand the lack of inclusion, and the generation of people who were making change happen that purposely exclude people. To a certain degree, I would say to a very large degree, those people's ancestors are still in play. However, I'm going to keep it on the positive side and talk about where I live now in the Midwest. When I first came to this area, I think it was like 1998, because my daughter went to school here, and the area where her friends were living, it was fairly unfriendly to Hispanics. They were attributed to lawn keepers and maybe dishwashers and those kind of things. And I have purposely watched the transition since that period of time up to this present day. And I would say there's a large group of restaurants that are Hispanic owned. That's super huge progress for this area. Sure, you have the lawn keepers, they're still there, but the thing of it is, I'll give you an example. I was coming from a grocery store just the other day on one of our busy streets where I live. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's an accident. No, it was not an accident. There was a brand new Hispanic restaurant open, and the traffic was backed up all the way down this main thoroughway. And I kind of slowed down to look and see, like, who's driving these cars? Who are these people going to this Hispanic restaurant? Well, I got a good view, and they're not all Hispanics. They were white people. So there's been some progress in that area. I don't know how they feel about Hispanics otherwise, but at least they were eating the food. So in that way, I can see progress in this area. It's not 100% there at all. And I was sitting here thinking too, when was the last time that I really felt excluded, and did people know? And I would have to say, in all honesty, and it was probably in the last church that I went to kind of talk about what Val's talking about. It was very interesting, because I really enjoy singing, those kind of things, and but I'm of this is my personality. I don't like to hold things in. and I don't like to stew over things that's bothering me. So did the people who excluded me know they were doing it? Yes, I shared it with them. You know, I just, because if you don't, there's only an assumption, and I don't want people not to know. I'm not going to blame them and say, I felt this way when you did that. Did you understand what you were doing? So just to have a conversation, and that freed me from having to think, oh my gosh, there are such bad people. So just having that conversation helped a lot. And they were not purposely excluding. There was just other stuff that was going on. I'm not saying that I've never been excluded, but in the case of my thinking for that particular situation, they were not excluding. So I think it's very healthy to have conversations with people and break down those assumptions.
Yeah, I totally agree. But having those conversations is very difficult. You know, if you approach it, one of the things I promote is if you approach it defensively, you're going to get defensive, right? So how do you approach it in a calm demeanor that doesn't escalate the situation? And it's, again, it's, you know, it's taking that thing, whatever that is, that's over here. So you and me are talking about this thing over here, like my body language, right? So let's talk about this. This is how I'm feeling. And it's, you know, don't blame them, but make sure you separate the issue from the person. And that is very hard. But I guarantee you, if you practice it, you'll make some headway. There'll be some people that just you can't talk to for whatever reason, right? Cognitive disability, they will never be there because of their life experiences and they're too far gone. We're not talking about them. We're talking about the people that you can have conversations with. And if they continue to be exclusive, then, you know, you have your answer. And, you know, maybe it'll take a few more years for them to come around, or they might not, who knows? But, you know, you did your part. So, but yeah, that's the hardest thing to do is you just address it, because I will be honest, you know, I've addressed it before as well. And people are, you know, they're like, oh, you know, they're so either biased or just in their own head or not prioritizing this. Again, you know, there's so many areas to prioritize when it comes to inclusion because of our diversity and all of our diversity. You know what I mean? Again, you just might not be on the priority list. You know, you might be on priority number 4 and they're focusing on 1 and 2 still.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm certainly not saying it was easy, and I certainly did not go right away when this thing happened. I had to take a few days to really get myself together, because I know my personality is to just really say it and be done with it and not always consider the feeling of the other person. Yeah. And so I had to just really focus on what's the best approach for this. And I, you know, even though they said they were not doing it on purpose or, you know, trying to exclude, I'm not real sure about that, but that wasn't my concern for them. My concern was for me to make sure they understood or knew that I was aware of what they were doing. Yeah. You know, because sometimes people, like you're saying, they're not aware, but I wanted to make sure they knew what they were doing and to make sure that this never happens to me again. And I hope it never happens to anyone else either. So that was my overriding goal, just to bring it up, you know, and in the same couple here, there was another time something happened, and I'm not one to share personal information that's related to my family in a public setting where other people, you know, because I'm thinking, I only use these words when I was asked a question about certain members of my family. I said, I'm not going to be the conduit of information sharing for my family. You know, you have the phone number. And that sparked the biggest blast. It's like, what are you talking about? They wanted me to be the conduit of information and got angry when I did not. So there's something I don't understand. I don't understand that kind of, I don't understand that at all. I just don't understand it. And maybe this is not even what you're talking about. It's just something that was on my mind that I need to get out of my system today, to try to understand, how do people get there when you don't want to talk about other people to them and they get angry because you don't talk about other people to them? What is that?
denial, I think. Yeah, or lack of self-awareness. Yeah, I see a hand up. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that there are a lot of times when, if discussions make people uncomfortable, even uncomfortable in their skin or uncomfortable with their thoughts, they tend to, I always say they kind of become ostriches, you know? They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to see, they don't want to know anything about it. And they don't want to talk about something that's going to make them uncomfortable or something that's going to want to make them change their perspectives or question what they're thinking.
Mhm.
And I think that's hard. I don't know how you do anything about that.
Yeah, you start small. And it's just, getting, I mean, my thought is you start small and start to open up people's eyes, to start it, breadcrumb by breadcrumb. And if they follow you along the journey, then, you can start giving them more breadcrumbs. And if they're not following you, then, you have a choice to make. So also over food, we talked about food and sharing food. Food is a great way, food, if you desire to drink alcohol, but food is a great way to, let's share a meal and talk. Some people do it over alcohol as well. That's an option too. Drinks, you don't have to have it alcoholic. You can do tasty beverages. There's a virgin mojito. There's plenty of those out there. So yeah, how do you do it over something common? Everyone eats, everyone drinks. It is a physical requirement of our bodies. So, that's a great way to start. And as you could, as Evelyn shared, yes, that's also a great way to start breaking down barriers across race by food. We have a couple of those places here. There's a couple taco places that when they're open, they're not open a lot, but when they're open from like that 3 to 6, man, yeah, there's lines out the door. And that's not just, Latina facing places. There's other places like that too. So yes, I saw a hand up.
Yes. Again, I'm talking about my personal experience. I'm a retired physician now, but I was in the military also. When I first moved to Columbus, I was stationed at Fort Moore, previously Fort Benning. One of my friends, one of the other doctors I met there, they invited me to dinner. And when I went there, they make some chicken. And his wife said to me, I know you like chicken, or people your kind like chicken. And that's why usually we don't make chicken, so we make it for you. It's stereotyping. That's all black like chicken to make me understand that I'm black to try to please. And to me that was hard. I don't know how to answer because I was at his house. I didn't say nothing. I said thank you. But the following day, I talked with the other doctor. I tried to explain to him gently that not every black person likes chicken, and black chicken did not determine your color, your everything else, how intelligent you are, or anything else. Everybody likes chicken because you want it. You want chicken, eat chicken, you want it. You don't have to.
Yeah, it's a great icebreaker. Natural icebreaker. People tend to be happier after they eat too. Especially
Yeah.
if it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, because I don't want to be disrespectful. I was at his house.
Yeah.
Which is the next thing.
Thanks for sharing. Way to be inclusive.
Well, sometimes, if you are black or Hispanic, people make assumption that's the type of food you eat, or that's the type of clothes you wear. They don't ask you, but that's the way you are. That's what you like. That's who you are. And I think that's wrong.
Yeah, bias. Bias is one of the key foundational things to a lot of this. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. How are we doing on time? All right. It is 2:08 for me. I think 1:08 for you all. Does anybody else want to share some thoughts on the topics presented?
Yeah, I'm concerned about, not necessarily concerned about it. I guess I'm concerned too, as a retired educator myself, about the fifth grader, the 10-year-old that was scrutinized because of the health situation, the heart health situation. I think that was Jay Blue's daughter. What else could have been done in that situation? What could the child who was being honest been given more information, or could there have been another discussion around that to perhaps bring more understanding to what was really going on with her child? What could have been done?
I think one option could have been, I know I did this with our son. It wasn't about inclusion and diversity, but death, but like, especially little kids, they don't know. I mean, they don't have the filters. They don't understand why they shouldn't say something like that. And even just to say, gosh, I understand why you might say that at first, but you also have to understand that makes this person feel really bad to say they're not valuable, instead of just, and so you can turn it into a teaching moment instead of, oh my God, I can't believe they said that. And then it just be silent, because over and over what I hear us all saying is we have to be able to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And I know certainly with myself, when I finally understood that, I could put myself in all kinds of situations, because I understand now that some kind of epiphany or knowledge comes after you do that stretch in the uncomfortable space. So I would hope that there was an educator bot nearby that says, wow, I'm sorry you feel that way, but this really hurt. Look how you made this person feel, that, they're very sad, but it's just my opinion, I suppose.
I'll go back to the source. So I guess thinking on a higher level, how do you set up, how as an educator, does a teacher provide questions to the classroom that doesn't force the kids to be exclusionary? Right. So as we think about it, it's the same thing with picking, I grew up as an athlete, so I was always picked for, I've always been tall. I know you guys only see me virtually, but I've always been tall. I shot up. I was always usually one of the tallest girls in the classroom. I'm 5'8". I'm decent sized woman. So for me, I was always picked first for athletics, but I felt really bad. At first I wasn't, but I felt really bad for those who weren't. So again, how do you, instead of forcing kids to be oh, pick your friends for your sports team, how do you create inclusive environments? Or how does the teacher, if we're picking teams, set up teams so that they can best work together, understanding your students to know, well, these are the, what I mean? So that they can work together like project teams. Because that's what you kind of do as a real world. You work in project teams and, you work in teams to execute. That's what a lot of the work, at least that I'm familiar with in the industry, does. So how do you do that? Yes. Thank you. Yeah. So how does the teacher provide questions instead of, exclusionary questions that are more inclusive? How do you have them work on things that are more inclusive? Yep. I see a hand up and I heard somebody.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm not a teacher. But I think, especially on the case of the 5 years old kid, a child about that age is like a sponge. Whatever you teach him, he will absorb it very quickly. The teacher in the classroom going to try his or her best to present information on the way to make the student understand how the other person feels. But also you have to think about the home environment. What kind of instruction, information received at home? And his peer, friends got his neighbor, friends he play with, his playmates. How does that affect him?
Mhm.
That's a very, very difficult thing for the teacher to say. Teaching is one thing, learn something in the classroom. He spent what, 3, 4 hours in the classroom, but he spent another 17, 10 hours outside with his family, his friend, who reinforce the bias. So I don't know, unless you got, some frank talking with the family, say, okay, hey, little Joe said this or that, let's work together to make little Joe better. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, you're right. The reinforcement definitely comes from home, whether it's positive or negative or somewhere in between. Go ahead. I see your hand up.
I was just going to say that the approach that I took was to discuss how anybody knew that she had a heart problem. And people would say, well, we heard her talk about it, or she was sick or something. And I said, okay, what kinds of things don't we know about you? And we went around the room and realized that there was something about everybody that could have made them a deficit in that rowboat because, and so maybe before you judge, unless you're going to sit down with a paper and pencil and figure out which deficit is worth more or less, which in a way sometimes I think is what people do, but but that you can't really judge because you don't really know all the facts.
Mhm.
And that was basically what I tried to do with the class while I was there, to help them understand better, that whether you realize it or not, everybody has an issue at least. And it may not be something you see right away.
Mhm. Yeah. Yep, we all have, I always say we all have our stuff. We all have our positives and we all have our negatives. And we also have positives based on perception and negatives based on perception. Anybody else want to share? No.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to that was like devil's advocate as an educator. I kind of want to hear what you guys had to say. Because a lot of this basically is based on privacy for the student. Because in my classroom, I always had kids with some kind of disability, whether it was ADHD or they were on some kind of special educational plan. The bottom line is you can't announce that.
Yeah.
You simply, because it's about them, you're not going to go around saying, you know what, well, Evelyn has this going on in her life. So knowing that up front, this is what we had the opportunity to do and still have the opportunity to do, is to share enough information, like Jay Blue was saying, about each other. Get to know each other really, really well. And I use the word team a lot in my classroom, a lot, almost like every day. And let's say, for example, oh my gosh, Angela, you're so good at this. Melissa, you're awesome at that. Casey, you are off the chart with this. Building each other up in spite of the differences, in spite of the disabilities, and including, like, for example, in my last classroom, I didn't have desks in my classroom. I had round tables like corporate America. And at that table, there were 5 to 6 kids. Everyone at the table had a responsibility in spite of their disability. I'll never forget this kid. His name was Jake. Jake was like severe ADHD, brilliant in math. He knocked the chart off our state exam. And whenever we needed a response at our corporate table for math, it always went to Jake. Jake, what did Miss Malone say we're supposed to do on this one? They didn't have to ask me, just ask Jake. But you set the stage for, in spite of what people are going through, you set the stage for their strengths, not their weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing that we could do, but keep it in mind that, and I 100% support the idea that we've got to keep the kids safe and we've got to keep their information private. But we don't have to keep their strengths private. We can enhance those every single day.
And could I ask a question?
Of course.
Angela, no, I said Crystal. In that case, how do you make one student not look down on the other student, especially those that, physical appearance different than the other student?
Okay. First of all, that's my indivisible group. It's Indivisible Northwest Illinois Crystal Lake. My name is Evelyn. And I'm always confused. It's Crystal. It's a
I'm
nice
sorry.
name though. I'll take it.
I'm sorry.
No. It's happened so many times. I need to change my name, write my name down. Bottom line is this. You have to set the stage in your classroom at the beginning, at day one. For example, and I always ask my principals, could you allow me 3 weeks? Every single year I did this. I need 3 weeks to set up my classroom. I don't want to be focused on curriculum or anything. I want to get to know my kids. I want to get to know the parents. I want us to have a communication. And when I set my classroom up, it has to be set up in a certain way before school starts. But during the process, they actually have to take ownership in the classroom. And so I don't know if you guys have heard of Dr. Harry Wong. I followed him completely 100%. That is my guide for teaching, is Dr. Harry Wong. He says that we are to facilitate. He says, when I go home from teaching, I don't go home tired. I go play tennis. And so when you give kids the responsibility, you're there to guide them. If they have questions, you surely should answer. But throughout the day, give them the opportunity to shine. And that includes everyone. So it's from the beginning. Not every school is going to have this opportunity. Not every teacher is going to ask for that. But I did that. And then when I set my classroom up, for example, I told the principal, I said, you can come and I'll walk to the hall. I'll walk the halls with you for 30 minutes. And when we go back to my classroom, my kids are still going to be on task because I have given the classroom over to them. We have respect set from the beginning. We have an honor system set from the beginning because we're all equally important. I'm going to learn some things from these kids. They're going to learn some things from me. It has to be mutual. Certainly, I'm the educator in the classroom, but they come with a ton of information that I need to know about them. And so if we never get a chance to talk before we really get into the curriculum, I'm going to be so curriculum driven that I don't see the kid and their problems or whatever they're dealing with. And so that's one reason why I say that let's say, for example, you come into the room, Val, and I've already had a talk with your parents. At some point in time, we're going to have a lesson on what you're dealing with so that we can all support you in that. But I'm not going to call your name. I don't have to call your name. We're going to know how to treat each other from the beginning. And when a new person came to the classroom, I'll give you this as an example. When a new kid came to the classroom, I sit back. I never had to say, this is how our classroom functions, because everyone at the corporate table, there's a leader at the corporate table. They are, if that new person went to that corporate table, they are sharing, this is what we do. This is what the teacher does. When she does direct instructions, we're going to listen and we're going to go to the table. And if I have a question, or if you have a question, we're not going to say, Miss Malone, I have a question, because that disrupts the whole classroom. We're going to raise our yellow paper, and she knows that no one at the table has an answer. So everything is set up from the beginning. I love teaching. I still love teaching because it's about them. You give them an opportunity to shine and take ownership. I think we talked about that earlier. Take ownership. It's not just for adults. It starts when kids are young. I did this in kindergarten. I didn't have corporate tables when I taught kindergarten, but give them the responsibility to make them feel like, you know what, you are probably the most important person in this classroom. Everyone needs to feel that way. So that's, I mean, I could go on and on and on talking about that, but it's about giving ownership and applauding people, not just once a month, once every 6 months. Applaud people when they do well. And that's going to be every single day in some regards.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
All right, does anybody else want to share? I think I'm trying to be cognizant of time today too. All right, well, I don't have anything else to share. I want to thank you all for your time today and your discussions and your feedback and sharing personal and non-personal situations. I think it's really important because one, it gives me an opportunity to learn. I always learn from these, and I hope you all learned something today as well.
Thank you so much, Angela. This was probably the best one for me. I need to hear this today. Yeah, on a personal level and also on an organizational level. I think Melissa knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, so this was quite helpful. So I need to take a couple of steps back in some areas too. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Could you hang around just for a minute, Angela? I need to ask you a question because about something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Angela.
Well, thank you guys for being here.
Thank
Melissa,
you very much, everyone.
I'll talk to you. Oh, Melissa, can you hang around too, just for a second?
Oh, sure.
Okay. All right. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank
Have
you.
a great afternoon.
Have a good day, a good week. See you later. See you
Okay.
next month.
Yes, bye. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye, Edie. Thank you, Angela.
Bye.
You're
You guys
welcome.
have a good one.
You too.
There's Susan. Good to see you, Susan.
You're on mute, Mom.
I read it. She said, I'm sorry.
And she's still on mute.
We'll just read your lips today, Susan.
Oh, now I'm talking.
There you
Yeah.
talking.
Can you
Yeah,
hear me now?
I can hear you. How's it
Yeah.
going?
This is the first time I use my iPad for this.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Okay. I thought it was a phone. I was wondering, that's not enough numbers for a phone, though.
Nope.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. You doing well?
I'm doing well. Yes. How about you all?
Yeah, doing pretty good. Busy these days, but doing well. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too now. You guys have a good day.
Okay, you too.
You too, Mom.
All right now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mhm.
I think Roseanne. She in it twice. Roseanne, can you hear me? Because you're still here on one device.
Hello.
Yeah, there you go. Just ensure-
Sorry.
Yeah, you are on two devices, so make sure you.
Oh, I am?
Yeah, you entered on two. There were two different devices for you.
Oh, I
Yeah.
should only be on my computer.
Yeah.
Huh. Wow, that's weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to stop and take a phone call from my daughter. Was having trouble, so.
Okay. Good to see you.
I know you too. It's been a while.
It has been. I was really glad to see you here today.
Well, I'm on the ballot in my town for Democratic county committee, so I've been busy doing that and promoting the campaign and all that because our primary is on June 6th. So been out there, stomping the streets, going door
Where are
to
you?
door
Where are you again?
in New Jersey.
Oh, New Jersey. Okay.
Yeah.
You're in
Yeah.
Cory Booker's area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Love that man.
Okay, then we'll talk soon then.
Oh, yes.
Take care and have a good week.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ooh, low battery. I'm not gonna be talking to y'all long because I've got low battery. So yeah, I know Melissa, you'd shown an interest in the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So I was just gonna let you guys know I'm gonna have to back it up. Is it back it up and move forward, whatever. It won't happen until September.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's record.